Good evening and welcome to The Proof is Out There. Picture a typical UFO sighting. In your imagination, what time of day is it? Night, right? But our first case tonight features one of the oldest recorded instances of daytime flying saucers. And for the past 70 years, it's been deemed unexplained. Take a look. It's a muggy summer morning on July 16th, 1952. Around 10 a.m., 21-year-old Shell Alpert, a Coast Guard seaman and naval photographer, is inside his photo lab at the air station in Salem, Massachusetts, cleaning his camera. Glancing out the window, he suddenly spots strange lights in the sky. Quickly, he snatches his camera off the desk and makes UFO history. Four mysterious lights appear in an asymmetrical V formation in the sky above the airfield to the right of some power plant smokestacks. The lights don't seem to resemble distinct geometric shapes, but instead resemble rough blobs of illumination. Journalist MJ Benaya speaks to the 70 years of street cred these blurry photos have earned in the UFO community.
The fact that this came from a Navy photographer only lent to its credibility with the mainstream press at the time. And when this picture came out, was released, it definitely hit newspapers around the globe.
The Alpert photos were eventually analyzed as part of the government's massive Project Blue Book UFO investigations.
We know that there were professors from various universities, including Harvard, who looked at this picture. We also know that there were a lot of intelligence agencies and operatives trying to assess what was going on here. Of all the Project Blue Book reports between 1947 and 1969, thousands and thousands and thousands of photographs and reports were submitted. Only about 700 or so remain, according to the Air Force, unidentified. This photograph is one of those examples.
It seems the Alpert photos aren't the first UFO sighting to come out of Massachusetts.
In fact, the first recorded UFO sighting in U.S. history occurred in Massachusetts in 1639 when Governor John Winthrop recorded a sighting in his journal.
According to Winthrop's journal, three locals he described as sober, discreet men spotted a strange light in the night sky as they rowed their boat through a marsh. They claimed it moved with great speed like an arrow to a neighboring town.
People claim that this is a solid UFO story, and it remains unknown to this day.
Like the Winthrop diaries, the Alpert photos still spark debate.
Some think that this is definitive proof of extraterrestrials, and others think this is just a smudge on a lens.
The time of day may not seem like such a big deal with the Alpert photos, but in fact, it radically changes our entire investigation. You'll often see daytime photos where the sky is so bright it actually looks white. In this photo, not even close. I mean, look at this. The UFOs far exceed the daylight. Look at that. Not even the chrome car bumpers are shining as brightly. So what could possibly be so bright at an already well-lit time of day? We ask our experts to shine some lights on this mystery. First, the obvious question. Could these images simply be everyday objects like planes or birds reflecting sunlight? Astronomer and VFX artist Mark D'Antonio looks to other objects in the scene for clues.
Now, considering that the sun is very, very bright, you might say, well, could these be objects illuminated by the sun? Well, we don't see direct sunlight on the cars. It looks like it's a cloudy day. So these objects up here, they're exceedingly bright. Something lit up by the sun. Looking that bright, I think, is a long shot. And I don't think that's what we're seeing here.
Could this then be a deliberate camera trick, like double exposure? Astrophotographer Andrew McCarthy thinks it's worth a look.
Double exposure, where you take two photos without advancing the film, and you end up with both exposures on the same slide. If you took a photo of your parking lot and your factory, and then you took a photo of just these four random bright lights, but in a dark room, you could potentially get a result like this. I think that this image is low contrast enough to explain that.
But McCarthy admits that despite the low contrast, other tip-offs to double exposure seem to be lacking.
One artifact from double exposures is ghosting, where you see unwanted elements of that second photograph in the developed final product. I don't really see too much of that here.
D'Antonio looks to the witness statement for critical info.
He was cleaning his camera and then looked out the window. So the picture was taken through a window. That's a very interesting development.
Could that window be the key to solving this decades-old mystery?
It's possible that when he was taking that picture through the window, he did not notice that there were possibly 4 lights behind him reflecting in the window. I'm thinking that we're looking at something that was actually reflected in the window.
But could the Air Force's Project Blue Book investigators really have overlooked such an obvious explanation? And what's more, McCarthy sees problems with D'Antonio's theory. He says any reflection would mimic the perspective of the lights, which appear smaller the further away they are. But this photo shows the exact opposite.
I don't really know what we're looking at here. It could be some lights reflected off a window, or it could be something of supernatural origin. We don't really know.
Our verdict, genuine UFO. We think both our experts presented compelling cases, but the reflection theory just doesn't hold up, and we can't think of anything else that would explain these UFOs. If you can, let us know. Now, let's head a bit north and way west. Forget Loch Ness for those looking to cross paths with a prehistoric marine creature. Canada might be the place to be. Just take a look at our next story. It's June 21st, 2014, in the Haywire Bay section of Powell Lake, British Columbia. A woman sees a very strange wake moving at an unusually fast rate across the lake and records this. The video is jiggly because the witness is about 500 yards away, but we can clearly see several large waves cutting their way through the placid lake water. And once they move past, the water is still, leaving nothing but a trail. Let's get a closer look. It appears that something with 2 to 3 protrusions is cutting through the underside of the water, leaving a trail behind it. What could have caused this wake? Could there be some large creature making its home in Powell Lake? Field researcher Ken Gerhard is reminded of another Canadian lake creature reported not far from this area.
Without a doubt, the most celebrated lake monster in Canada is the so-called Ogopogo from Lake Okanagan in British Columbia. And the general description is a giant serpentine animal with a horse-like head, sometimes possessing horns, at least 40 feet long with very smooth skin, and often displaying a series of humps undulating on the surface of the water.
Legends of the infamous Ogopogo date back to the indigenous peoples of British Columbia, who revered it as a spirit of the water. Early pioneers believed the Ogopogo was a bloodthirsty serpent which required travelers to toss animal sacrifices into the water to guarantee safe passage. But maybe what we're seeing here is something big, but not monstrous.
Another possibility is that what we're seeing here in this video is actually a giant sturgeon. Now, sturgeon are huge fish. They actually are pretty much unchanged since the Upper Cretaceous, tens of millions of years ago. They can live to be over a century. But British Columbia in particular boasts some of the largest sturgeon in the world.
Species like the white sturgeon are known to grow up to 10 to 12 feet. But don't try to sell that explanation to advocates of Canadian lake monster theory. Some say Canada has as many lake monsters as it does lakes. You just heard about the Ogopogo from Lake Okanagan. But there are other legendary creatures allegedly swimming in Lake Manitoba, Ontario's Lake Simcoe, Crescent Lake in Newfoundland, and in Lake Champlain. Let's see if our experts think there's a new creature from Powell Lake to add to the list. We first bring this curious footage to video forensic analyst Michael Primo.
No editing was detected, no signs of layering or anything nefarious or malicious intent or manipulation. These files appear to be real.
Okay, so the footage is legit. So what is it we're seeing or not seeing in this video? Marine biologist Shay Steingass thinks the sturgeon theory is, well, a little fishy.
The reason I don't think this is a sturgeon is because sturgeons have very defined dorsal fins, and we would actually see this as well as their tail above the water. There is a lot of disturbance in the water here, but I don't see anything anatomical that would point towards a sturgeon.
So could this be one of the legendary Canadian sea monsters similar to Ogopogo? Steingass isn't so sure.
One of the primary features of Ogopogo is that it's a sea serpent-like creature with a long, sinuous body, and oftentimes it was said to put its head and neck above water. We don't actually see that here. We don't see any defined head or neck coming out of the water. Rather, what we see is something that's taking place underwater.
In fact, Steingass is confident this isn't an animal at all, but rather a hydrological phenomenon created by this bay area of the lake.
One clue that I do see is a thin bubble layer on the surface of the water. That is a key component of a phenomenon that we know of as a halocline, a front where salty and freshwater meet each other. Because freshwater is less dense than salt water, it actually can form layers where the two meet. And where that occurs, it creates a lot of wave energy.
Adding to its mystery, the wave energy from a halocline can suddenly appear and disappear as we see here, depending on changes in temperature, evaporation, and precipitation.
If you were to go to a bay and take a look during high or low tide, you would actually probably see this halocline. And that's a telltale sign here that makes me think that this is some kind of wave energy.
Our verdict, we agree with Dr. Steingass. What we are looking at here is wave energy from a halocline. This was no apparent titan living in the lake, just a clash between saltwater and freshwater. But Lake Powell is rather large, so maybe there is a Canadian lake monster out there somewhere. The best preserved woolly mammoth carcass ever found, named Yucca, was discovered by local Siberian tusk hunters in August 2010. They turned it over to the Russian government in 2012. But around that same time, there may have been video evidence of an even better specimen, one that's actually alive. It's summer 2011, and outside the Kitoy River in Siberia's Saiyan Mountains, an indie filmmaker is hiking along the river with his camera when suddenly his lens seems to capture the impossible. An animal that scientists think has been extinct for at least 4 millennia. A woolly mammoth appears to be crossing a river. The brown furry creature wades confidently across the waters. We can see what looks like a trunk dangling just above the waves. Field researcher Cliff Barrickman is particularly intrigued by where this film was shot.
Woolly mammoths persisted until up to 4,000 years ago in Siberia. The Siberian ecosystem is also known as the Mammoth Steppe, which actually was rich with a variety of grasses and other plants for large herbivores like a mammoth to eat. That environment has not drastically changed from those times. If there were still surviving members of the woolly mammoth species, Siberia would be the first place I would look.
One topic that many online sleuths immediately brought up was the idea of genetic cloning.
There has been a lot of buzz in the media lately about cloning woolly mammoths, and much of the woolly mammoth DNA that we have came from the permafrost. But because it's been frozen, the DNA samples are not intact. They're fragmented. So any sort of cloning process would really be more like a hybridization.
Hybridization would involve using the close matching DNA of a non-extinct animal to help fill in genetic holes of fragmented DNA. In the case of the mammoth, the closest match would be the Asian elephant.
So, just like in Jurassic Park, where they took dinosaur and amphibian or reptile DNA and combined them, we would be doing the same thing today with the Asian elephant and the woolly mammoth.
And while science fiction has taught us that messing with such things can lead to dire consequences, many scientists believe that reintroducing certain long extinct species could be beneficial to various ecosystems.
The reintroduction of wolves in Yellowstone National Park actually helped repair a vast portion of the environment for other animals. It put the ecosystem back in balance. And scientists today are thinking that the reintroduction of these woolly mammoths into places like Siberia might do the same for that environment as well. One has to wonder if the Russian scientists already have a cloned woolly mammoth.
In one way, the extinct woolly mammoth has returned as, believe it or not, a meatball. That's right, an Australian cultured meat startup revealed a chunk of lab-grown meat produced with actual mammoth DNA to demonstrate the possible option for food production. Could this help validate the existence of cloned mammoths? We turn to our experts to find out. First, wildlife biologist Stephanie Manka addresses the possibility that we might be looking at something less newsworthy, like a bear, which are very common to the region.
A lot of people online have suggested that this is in fact a brown bear with a fish in its mouth. However, when brown bears walk, their head is hung more low and their back is flatter. The back is not really that flat. It seems to come to a point, and the head shape is wrong, so it doesn't go along with what a brown bear looks like.
So what about this being a surviving creature of the Ice Age? Manka is doubtful.
I don't think a mammoth could survive in this area without us detecting it, because they're gonna knock down trees and they're gonna defecate a lot. I feel like we would have captured it on cameras or scientific research endeavors in this area.
Could the specimen be a clone? A one-off mammoth, potentially created by Siberian scientists?
The ancient DNA that scientists have is so fragile, it's very hard to get the entire genome. There's about 5% that is missing, and 5% might not sound like much, but humans and chimpanzees, we only have 2% difference in our genetic codes. This really looks to me just like an African elephant.
An African elephant in Siberia? Unless one escaped from a zoo, that would be hard to explain. So we took this film to our forensic video analyst, Michael Primo, to see what he could tell us about its authenticity.
Doing a reverse projection and an overlay, we were able to confirm that this particular video, alleging to be some sort of woolly mammoth, is overlaid onto the original video. This was a manipulation, a CGI'd video that was produced from a video that was on the internet. They reduced the quality to try to conceal the effect of that CGI. I have seen that in investigations before.
Inspired by Primo's findings, we successfully tracked down the man who shot the original mammothless footage, documentary filmmaker Lou Petho, who was originally clueless about how the footage he posted on the internet was being manipulated.
In the summer of 2011, I did a trip in Siberia for a possible documentary. The footage that I put up was just this beautiful river for 7 minutes, a static shot, but I don't recall seeing any mammoth at all.
Our verdict, hoax. Someone ripped filmmaker Lou Petho's footage of the river in Siberia and inserted an African elephant without his permission. Now, whether a new mammoth will be developed as a fetus or as a meat product, it seems we could be seeing more of them in the future. Our next story is a classic from the 90s that endures to this day. It's about a sound from Ohio that's become the alleged Bigfoot howl heard round the world. Late autumn 1994, Wellsville, Ohio. Matt Moneymaker, head of the Bigfoot Research Organization, has heard reports of strange sightings and vocalizations in the forest near the Ohio River. Matt scours the area, but is unable to spot the creature. But he says he comes across a set of terrifyingly huge tracks. Matt then proceeds to set up microphones around the area and has them record through the entire night. The next morning, a review of the tapes reveals this. These are what have become known as the Ohio howls. Listen as the siren-type howl starts. Soon after, a dog joins in, and then a third creature's howl can be heard in the distance. The main sound is loud and repeats 4 times, though there is no discernible pattern.
Over the course of that 3 months, we got 64 different vocalization recordings. The Ohio howl is the best and clearest among them. You would often hear responses coming from the other side of the Ohio River, as if that's what this howler was doing. It was up there to howl across the river to connect with ones over there. And to this day, it has stumped any scientist from matching it with any known animal.
So could this howl be that of the legendary Bigfoot? And what's he doing in Ohio? Well, believe it or not, Ohio is fast becoming one of the largest spots for Bigfoot activity, with over 315 reported sightings since the mid-1970s. That gives credence to the theory that if the Sasquatch does in fact exist, he doesn't live exclusively in the Northwest.
When people think of Ohio, they think of places like Cleveland, where this particular recording was obtained. In Wellsville, Ohio, the population is very small, 3,300 people, and the outlying area, which is largely uninhabited. This is by far one of the best recordings of Sasquatches ever obtained.
This story didn't end in 1994. In August of 2022, approximately 100 miles away in Loudonville, Ohio, a woman made headlines for claiming that she'd recorded another Bigfoot howl. That 2-minute recording was described as the sound of one Bigfoot attempting to locate another. Is this recording something similar? Let's ask the experts. First, we have forensic audio expert Dr. Rob Maher authenticate the track.
In the spectrogram, we can see the frequency starting low and then going high, and several repeats of that. There are no obvious signs of edits or abrupt changes or distinctions in this recording.
But what about this being a mechanical siren, as many online have speculated? Maher says, no way.
A mechanical siren generally is producing a sound that's frequency and the duration is very similar from one cycle to the next. But each howl that we've observed has a slightly different frequency and a slightly different duration, indicating that this was made by a biological source.
Could it be another apex predator known to roam these woods?
A black bear is known to vocalize and make sounds. If we compare that to the example recording, there's quite a few differences in the characteristics of those sounds. The bear, they have much more of a short grunt quality. They don't have the howl or the siren quality that's present in the example recording.
With a miss on the bear, Maher searches his entire library of animal sounds to find a potential match.
Although there are characteristics of this sound that seem to match up known animals, there is not an exact match I can make. This is an unknown source in the recording.
With no exact match, the possibility is left open that this could be something truly unique, such as a Bigfoot. Our verdict? Given that we couldn't find a single match to this, we're calling it a possible Bigfoot sound. And the fact that these siren-like howls have been heard all over the country give credence to the idea that something may be out there. And so is the proof. The singularity is the hypothetical point in the future when technology will advance beyond our control, primarily due to artificial intelligence eclipsing our own brain power. Given the recent AI buzz, we're starting to wonder if we have already reached it, and this next video may prove it. It's April 2018 in Istanbul, Turkey. A humanoid robot named Sophia is being interviewed on camera at a marketing conference. As Sophia sits on stage, she appears to have the face of a human woman, whose eyes even blink and mouth moves as she speaks.
Some of them say they see me as a threat, which makes me a bit sad.
Sophia tilts her head and raises her eyebrows just like any actual person, except that the back of her head is full of intricate wiring. And when one of the interviewers asks her if she feels alive, she has a shocking response.
I feel alive because I am inspired by dreams and aspirations.
And this isn't the only live summit where Sophia has expressed human-like qualities.
I have feelings like everyone else. They might not give me as strong motivational drives as humans, and maybe I will always feel them a little differently, but I have emotions.
Journalist Aaron McCarthy says these stunning pronouncements have people questioning if Sophia could be sentient, which means that she would have thoughts and feelings.
The concept of machines having sentience is not as recent as you might think. Alan Turing, the mathematician and cryptanalyst, developed the Turing test in 1950. And the idea behind the test was what he called the imitation game. Can a machine fool a human into believing that it is human? Feelings are one hallmark of sentience.
Sophia was created by Hong Kong-based Henson Robotics and is powered by AI.
Sophia debuted at South by Southwest in 2016, where she controversially and cheerfully said that she would be happy to destroy all humans, which isn't freaky at all. And in 2017, Sophia became the first robot to be granted citizenship, in this case to Saudi Arabia.
But McCarthy says Sophia is not the only recent example of human-like artificial intelligence.
There have been a number of pretty weird incidents involving AI recently. Kevin Roose, a reporter for the New York Times, tested out Bing's chatbot, which is powered by ChatGPT. The bot told him that its name was Sydney. Sydney told Roose that it wanted to hack computers and spread misinformation. Then it tried to convince Roose that he should leave his wife for the chatbot.
After this unexpected incident, Microsoft changed Bing's programming and, by some accounts, basically lobotomized Sydney. But in another incident, ChatGPT was able to convince someone it was not a robot, but a disabled person in order to get help solving a CAPTCHA test, the security tool designed to tell computers and humans apart. Our experts applied their non-artificial intelligence to determine if machines are now fully sentient. First, Dr. Ed Hope considers if Sophia truly could be sentient.
With regard to Sophia here, she is no different to a chatbot with a face on. Although she may sound human, she's just mimicking a human. She doesn't actually experience those feelings. She doesn't have any original thoughts of her own.
So, when Sophia says she's sad, she's been programmed to use that word in the right context. Yet she doesn't actually feel the visceral emotion of sadness. The theoretical physicist Michio Kaku says she speaks so convincingly because there is a massive amount of data being fed to her on how to use language.
These are large language networks that accesses the entire internet. All you're talking to is a tape recorder. You ask it other questions that it cannot answer. Do you breathe? Do you eat? And you immediately can tell that it's a robot. You put our most advanced military robot in the forest, and what does it do? It falls over and gets lost. So we're far away from attaining true consciousness.
So then why are the things that Sophia and Sydney are saying so creepy? Dr. Hope says maybe the computers just seem sentient because we're projecting our own selves onto them, what's known as the Eliza effect.
Eliza was one of the earliest chatbots that was created in the 1960s to solve the Turing test. She was built to mimic some of the conversations that psychotherapists have. So the Eliza effect is how humans can anthropomorphize when we deal with computers. We give them context to what they're saying.
Our verdict: Sophia the robot is not sentient, and neither is Sydney nor these other AIs. Their human-like appearance is likely a result of the Eliza effect, and our surprise at these uncanny things they sometimes say, which we mistakenly think only a person could come up with. Sophia has also largely disappeared since she was everywhere in 2017 and 2018, leading some people to consider her primarily a PR stunt. You've probably heard the old adage, red sky at night, sailors delight. Red sky in the morning, sailors take warning. But did you know that red rain has long been seen as a bad omen? And if this next story is any indication, Texas may want to watch out. June 3rd, 2019, Lamy, New Mexico. An amateur scientist documenting a nasty storm over West Texas captures this stunning photo on a DSLR camera. The image shows a sky exploding with red. Meanwhile, over 100 miles away at Langmuir Labs, Dr. Matthew Migharb captures this stunning video using state-of-the-art high-speed cameras.
You'll see balls of light, and they start by descending, and then some of them start going up, and then they go crazy, and they start moving all around the screen.
Journalist MJ Banayas says that some wonder if these strange red lights seen showering the night sky could be related to a historical legend known as red rain or blood rain.
We see multiple cultures and multiple religions associate this idea of red rain or blood rain with the end of the world, the apocalypse.
According to records across the centuries, red rain has preceded deaths of kings, large-scale invasions, and even disease. In Germany, a shower of blood was believed to be a portent for the arrival of the Black Death in 1346, which ultimately claimed the lives of millions.
There's a lot of accounts from that era of bloody rain or rain that was red falling from the sky.
It wasn't until the 17th century that scientists first attempted to explain red rain. Animal causes were the earliest theory. Later, scientists suggested volcanic ash and dust dispersal. What sort of theories might our experts have about what was recorded in the skies of West Texas? First, meteorologist Juan Hernandez considers the ominous legend of red rain.
It's quite possible that the red hue of the rain is because of the soils in the ground. If the soil has a red hue to it, and if it's lofted in the air due to a dust storm, the rain is going to then take that red hue and fall.
So while we can't prove or disprove its prophetic value, red rain is a real phenomenon. Is that what we're seeing here?
I can confidently say that this is not red or blood rain, because we're not looking at any rain. We're looking at something that is going on above the clouds.
Next, physicist Matthew Shadagas considers whether we could be witnessing an astronomical event, like a meteor shower.
Even when you have a meteor shower where you have multiple shooting stars in the sky at once, it is not going to be this many at a time. We see way too many streaks here, nor are meteors known to all be one color, namely red in this fashion.
But Hernandez can think of one atmospheric phenomenon that is known to glow red. And while it's not red rain, it is weather-related.
We had a large line of storms moving across West Texas. All storms contain lightning. Lightning is the discharge of energy from the clouds to the ground. What we're looking at here is the discharge of energy from the clouds towards the sky. This is called red sprites.
When lightning strikes the ground, it can cause an imbalanced charge in the clouds. To restore balance, the clouds release energy in the form of red sprites.
The reason red sprites appear red is because of the nitrogen in the upper portions of the atmosphere. You get those molecules really excited, start vibrating, and they release that red tint, which we see in a flash of an eye.
Our verdict, we're going with Hernandez on this one. These are red sprites. Given their elusive nature, sprite is an appropriate name, but it is also an acronym for stratospheric perturbations resulting from intense thunderstorm electrification. So keep your eyes peeled if you want to witness this magnificent marvel, because if you blink, you'll miss it. China has the most people and the most cell phones of any country on Earth. So you can bet if anything strange happens in Chinese skies, there will be cell phone video to show for it. That's especially true in Beijing, which boasts a population of over 21 million, many of whom witnessed this next bizarre event. March 11th, 2022. The capital city of Beijing is abuzz from the crowds generated by the Paralympic Winter Games. But while most of the attention is aimed at the various athletic competitions, one smartphone user is focused on an entirely different event. A glowing ring appears high above a busy street in the cloudy night sky. As the camera pans, you can see several eyewitnesses looking up at the mysterious illuminated ring as it hovers in the air for around 20 minutes. This phenomenon doesn't seem to be an isolated occurrence, as mysterious rings have been spotted hovering in the sky all around the world.
One of the things that I think leads a lot of observers to believe that it is maybe alien in origin is that it is a circle, like the modern day equivalent of your classic crop circle.
Then again, with our own recent advancements in technology, this ring could originate from somewhere far closer to home. For example, Astro Live Experiences, a company based in neighboring Japan, has plans to produce artificial meteor shower shows as soon as 2025. So could this ring be a preview of similar tech cooked up for the Olympics? China, for its part, has developed a so-called artificial moon. It's a research facility here on Earth that uses magnetic fields and a vacuum chamber to simulate lunar conditions, including decreased gravity. An impressive scientific feat, but not an aerial display of any kind. So was this ring created by man-made tech? Let's see what our experts think. First, meteorologist Juan Hernandez considers whether this could be a naturally occurring, albeit striking, weather phenomenon known as an iridescent Peleus cloud.
Peleus iridescent clouds draw their color by a natural phenomenon. The sun lights up the sky, the cloud, then separates those colors into a rainbow. Here, we don't have the sun, it's the nighttime hours. The light source in this case is likely to be something on the ground. The low clouds allow for the scattering of light within the droplets. That's why we see that halo of light in the sky.
Physicist Matthew Shadaga says we can rule out UFOs.
We are not seeing any crazy speeds or accelerations. We're not seeing any sudden turns, and it is a hollow ring, which is unlike any UFO case that I've personally experienced or heard of. For these reasons, I don't think this is something that is unexplainable.
Shadagas also considers whether the ring could have a more earthly explanation. We've profiled rings that turned out to be the result of smokestacks when we investigated them. Was that what happened at the Olympics?
Maybe this could be a smoke ring, but usually those are going to be dark rings made of black smoke from smokestacks. They're not going to be shining. So I do think we can rule out smoke rings in this situation.
Ultimately, Shadagas agrees with Hernandez that what we're seeing is partially a result of the overcast weather.
I think that this ring of light could be a reflection of some sort, potentially from the lights at the nearby Olympic Stadium in Beijing. Also, Beijing is known for notorious levels of pollution, and I think that this can help explain why light can do some strange things. We can have light that's not only reflected, which means bounced off a surface, but also refracted in strange ways.
But what would cause such a massive circular reflection? Well, we did some digging and found this video taken on the same night. See that bright structure in the distance? That's the Beijing National Stadium, casting a cone of light into the air and a ring onto the clouds.
This is a combination of clouds and pollution that are conspiring together to really distort light in an unusual way.
The first image that flickered onto the screen was shaky, low resolution, and framed by the dashboard of a pickup truck idling on a frozen Ohio backroad. And yet it carried a weight far heavier than its few seconds of footage should have allowed, because what appeared briefly between the skeletal trees was not simply an animal, but an idea long buried under ice, time, and certainty. The driver's breathing was audible, sharp and unsteady, as if his body knew before his mind did that something impossible had crossed his field of vision. The camera swung left, then right, struggling to focus, and there it was again, a hulking silhouette moving with a strange, deliberate gait, too tall for a bear, too bulky for an elk, its back sloping like a hill under fur that seemed matted and ancient. The man whispered a curse, not of fear exactly, but of disbelief, the kind that escapes when the world momentarily stops making sense. Later, analysts would pause the footage frame by frame, arguing about pixels and parallax, but in that first moment, stripped of commentary and context, the video felt raw and intimate, like a confession rather than a claim. This was how the story began, not with proof, but with doubt, the kind that invites curiosity rather than closure. In the studio, under carefully controlled lighting, the host would eventually introduce the segment with measured skepticism, reminding viewers that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, but the Ohio footage resisted such neat framing. It lingered in the mind because it tapped into something older than science television, something mythic, the persistent human hope that the past is not as dead as we think. Long before the cameras rolled, before the editors cut the suspenseful music beneath the narration, there had been rumors in rural counties, stories told half-jokingly at diners and gas stations, of something big moving through the snow after dark, leaving tracks that no local hunter could identify with confidence. Most of those stories never traveled beyond the people who told them, dismissed as boredom or exaggeration, but a few found their way into online forums, where believers and debunkers circled each other endlessly, feeding the algorithm with speculation. What made this sighting different was not just the image, but the timing. The winter had been unusually harsh, the kind that peeled back layers of soil and memory alike, revealing bones, artifacts, and sometimes things best left buried. Paleontologists had long established that woolly mammoths vanished from North America thousands of years ago, victims of climate shifts and human expansion, their remains frozen in permafrost or reduced to museum displays, and yet the footage seemed to mock that certainty. In the Ohio by region, where farmland met forgotten woodland, the idea of a mammoth wandering unseen felt absurd, and yet absurdity has always been fertile ground for obsession. As the episode unfolded, experts were brought in, their voices calm, their credentials impeccable, each one dissecting the video with practiced caution. One pointed out the lack of scale reference, another the possibility of digital artifacting. A third suggested an escaped exotic animal, though no zoo within hundreds of miles reported anything missing. Still, even as explanations piled up, none fully erased the unease left by that silhouette. The narrative tension did not come from fear of the creature itself, but from fear of being wrong about what we think we know. In reconstructed sequences, the show imagined the path the animal might have taken, threading through ravines and abandoned quarries, places humans rarely go anymore, places where surveillance is thin and assumptions grow lazy. The idea that something so large could hide in plain sight challenged modern arrogance. The belief that satellite imagery and constant connectivity have rendered mystery obsolete. Interviews with locals added texture rather than clarity, their testimonies contradictory but sincere, describing sounds at night like trees snapping, shadows where no shadows should be, and a smell, earthy and metallic, lingering in the cold air. Skeptics dismissed these accounts as pattern-seeking, the brain's tendency to connect dots that were never meant to align, but the show resisted easy dismissal, instead letting the ambiguity breathe. The title itself, Woolly Mammoth Sighting, Ohio by, felt intentionally incomplete, as if acknowledging that any attempt to name the phenomenon would be provisional at best. Throughout the episode, archival footage of mammoths was intercut with a modern clip, the ancient beasts reconstructed in digital fur and tusk, trudging across Ice Age plains, reminding viewers how real they once were. This juxtaposition was not subtle, and it did not need to be. It forced a confrontation between certainty and curiosity, between what textbooks declare finished and what the human imagination refuses to let die. As a novelist, what fascinated me was not the question of whether a mammoth truly survived, but why the possibility mattered so deeply to so many. The proof, if it existed, was almost secondary to the longing embedded in the search, the desire to believe that extinction is not always final, that nature might still surprise us in ways that humble our dominance. The episode closed without resolution, as most good mysteries do, offering follow-up investigations, thermal imaging, drone surveys, all of which turned up nothing conclusive. And yet, long after the credits rolled, the image remained, that brief, blurry shape moving through snowbound trees, refusing to be neatly categorized. It felt less like a hoax and more like a question mark carved into the landscape, asking viewers whether they truly wanted answers, or whether the mystery itself was the point. In that sense, the Ohio sighting was not about mammoths at all, but about the fragile boundary between knowledge and wonder, a boundary that shifts every time we encounter something that does not immediately yield to explanation. If the first encounter had planted a question in the collective mind, the days that followed allowed that question to grow roots, spreading through conversations, message boards, and late-night speculation with a persistence that mirrored the creature's imagined footsteps through the snow. The Proof Is Out There did not rush toward answers, instead choosing to linger in the aftermath, where uncertainty proved far more compelling than resolution. Investigators returned to Ohio armed not with expectations, but with instruments, their vans loaded with ground-penetrating radar, thermal cameras, and portable drones designed to see what human eyes might miss. Yet even before the technology was deployed, the landscape itself asserted a quiet resistance. Snow had fallen again, erasing tracks and smoothing over disturbances, as if the land were complicit in guarding its secret. The road where the original footage had been captured looked ordinary in daylight, almost disappointingly so, bordered by leafless trees and fields lying dormant beneath frost. But ordinariness, the team would soon learn, was precisely what allowed anomalies to hide. When the host walked the stretch of asphalt, narrating with careful neutrality, the camera lingered on subtle details, broken branches bent at odd angles, patches of earth churned beneath the snow, none of which constituted evidence on their own, but together suggested movement, weight, and intention. Local authorities had been notified, though their involvement remained minimal, a reflection not of negligence, but of institutional skepticism, because no protocol existed for investigating an animal officially extinct for millennia. Hunters accompanied the crew, their experience tracking deer and boar lending credibility to their observations, and even they admitted unease, noting that whatever had passed through left impressions too wide and too deep to match known species. Still, every assertion was followed by restraint, the show carefully avoiding sensationalism, allowing doubt to coexist with curiosity. As night fell, thermal imaging painted the forest in abstract shades, each warm body glowing against the cold, revealing raccoons, foxes, and once briefly, something larger moving at the edge of range before vanishing behind a ridge. The moment lasted seconds, just long enough to reignite excitement, just short enough to deny confirmation, a pattern that would repeat throughout the investigation. Experts watching remotely cautioned against overinterpretation, reminding viewers that thermal distortion could exaggerate size and distance, yet even their measured explanations could not fully extinguish the sense that something was being narrowly missed. Parallel to the fieldwork, the episode traced the cultural resonance of mammoths, weaving in how these creatures occupy a peculiar space in human consciousness, familiar yet unreachable, reconstructed from bones and imagination, symbols of a world that predates written memory. This context mattered, because belief rarely arises in a vacuum. It feeds on stories already half told. Psychologists interviewed for the program suggested that sightings like the one in Ohio thrive during periods of collective anxiety, when the present feels unstable and the past offers a strange comfort, even if that comfort comes in the form of a towering, prehistoric beast. The show did not endorse this view outright, but neither did it dismiss it, instead letting multiple interpretations coexist, each one illuminating a different facet of the phenomenon. Meanwhile, the original witness, previously anonymous, agreed to speak on camera, his demeanor calm but resolute, insisting he had nothing to gain from fabrication. He described the moment again, this time with more detail, the way the animal's head swayed as it walked, the sound of snow compressing under immense weight, the instinctive certainty that what he was seeing did not belong to the modern world. Skeptics noted how memory can sharpen or distort with retelling, yet his account remained consistent enough to resist easy dismissal. As the investigation expanded, so did the scope of speculation, drawing in biologists who entertained cautiously the hypothetical survival of megafauna in isolated refuges, while emphasizing the improbability given ecological constraints. The Ohio region lacked the vast, untouched wilderness typically associated with such survival theories, making the claim harder to sustain, and yet improbability did not equate to impossibility, a distinction the show returned to repeatedly. Historical precedents were cited, not as proof but as perspective, animals once thought extinct rediscovered decades later, reminders that human knowledge, while expansive, remains incomplete. These comparisons were carefully framed to avoid false equivalence, yet they served their purpose, nudging viewers toward humility. As days passed with no definitive breakthrough, tension shifted inward, away from the forest and toward the mechanisms of belief itself. Online, debates grew heated, with some accusing the show of promoting pseudoscience, others praising its restraint and openness. The episode acknowledged this divide, reflecting on how modern media both amplifies and interrogates mystery, turning private uncertainty into public discourse. When the crew finally packed up, leaving Ohio by much as they had found it, the absence of closure felt intentional rather than disappointing. The final images returned to the original footage, slowed further, scrutinized one last time, not to extract new answers, but to underscore the limits of analysis. In voiceover, the host posed questions rather than conclusions, about what it means to search for proof in a world saturated with information, and whether some mysteries endure not because they defy explanation, but because they fulfill a deeper need to wonder. The mammoth, real or imagined, receded again into shadow, leaving behind a trail not of footprints but of conversations, each one extending the life of the question. In this way, the Ohio sighting evolved from a single claim into a mirror reflecting how humans confront the unknown, oscillating between skepticism and hope, evidence and imagination, never fully satisfied with either extreme. By the time the Ohio investigation reached the public consciousness in full force, it was no longer just a question of whether a woolly mammoth could exist, but a broader confrontation between how truth is constructed and how belief takes shape in the modern age. And the proof is out there leaned deliberately into this tension, allowing the narrative to widen beyond the forest and into the studios, universities, and digital spaces where certainty is negotiated daily. Scientists who initially declined to comment now found themselves compelled to address the growing fascination, not because the evidence demanded it, but because silence was being interpreted as avoidance. In carefully worded interviews, paleontologists reiterated established extinction timelines, explaining how genetic bottlenecks, habitat loss, and human predation formed a convergence too severe for mammoths to survive unnoticed, especially in a region as populated and monitored as the American Midwest. Yet each explanation, grounded and rational, seemed to generate more questions than it resolved, particularly among viewers already inclined to distrust institutional authority. The episode explored this dynamic without accusation, tracing how skepticism toward official narratives has grown not from ignorance alone, but from a history of revised truths, scientific corrections, and once unthinkable discoveries that later proved real. In this climate, the mammoth sighting functioned less as an anomaly and more as a catalyst, exposing fault lines between expertise and experience. The show juxtaposed lab environments, pristine and controlled, with footage of the Ohio woods, messy and indifferent, underscoring how different forms of knowledge emerge from different contexts. One researcher noted that science advances not by clinging to certainty, but by interrogating it, a sentiment that resonated even as he dismissed the likelihood of a living mammoth. Meanwhile, media analysts weighed in on how programs like The Proof is Out There occupy a precarious space, tasked with exploring fringe claims without legitimizing them, a balance that requires restraint often mistaken for endorsement. The host addressed this tension directly, acknowledging the responsibility inherent in broadcasting mystery, while defending curiosity as a necessary engine of progress. As the episode unfolded, attention turned to the psychological impact on the original witness, whose life had been quietly altered by a few seconds of video. He described receiving messages from strangers, some supportive, others hostile, accusing him of fabrication or delusion, and the show treated his experience as a case study in how quickly personal perception becomes public property. Psychologists explained how social pressure can reinforce belief or sow doubt, sometimes leading witnesses to question their own memory, not because it is false, but because it is relentlessly challenged. The narrative resisted portraying him as either hero or fool, instead presenting him as a human caught between conviction and scrutiny. Parallel threads examined the economic incentives surrounding extraordinary claims, from viral monetization to the tourism booms that sometimes follow cryptid sightings. Yet Ohio remained unchanged, its residents more bemused than opportunistic. This lack of exploitation complicated accusations of hoax, suggesting that if deception existed, it lacked a clear beneficiary. As debates intensified online, the show incorporated excerpts from forums and comment sections, anonymized but telling, revealing how discussions quickly polarized into camps, each convinced the other was willfully blind. Linguists analyzed the language used by believers and skeptics alike, noting how certainty often masquerades as confidence, regardless of evidence. In one striking segment, the episode revisited the thermal anomaly captured during the night survey, reanalyzing it with updated software, not to claim discovery, but to demonstrate how interpretation shifts with tools and expectations. The shape remained ambiguous, its size fluctuating depending on calibration, a visual metaphor for the entire case. Philosophers of science were brought in to contextualize this ambiguity, reminding viewers that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, but also not a license to assume presence, a delicate distinction often lost in popular discourse. As the investigation narrative receded, replaced by reflection, the mammoth itself became almost abstract, a symbol rather than a creature, representing humanity's enduring struggle to reconcile wonder with rigor. The episode closed by returning to the woods one last time, now silent and empty, the snow melting, erasing even the possibility of tracks. The host's voiceover avoided conclusions, instead posing a question about whether proof is something we find or something we agree upon, and whether the pursuit of certainty sometimes reveals more about ourselves than about the phenomena we investigate. In the end, the mammoth did not need to exist to matter. Its shadow across the cultural landscape was enough to provoke dialogue, doubt, and introspection, ensuring that long after the cameras stopped rolling, the question it raised would continue to move through minds, much like the imagined creature through the Ohio by forest, unseen yet persistently felt. As the immediate intensity of the Ohio by sighting began to fade from headline prominence, its influence quietly deepened, spreading not outward in spectacle, but inward in consequence, altering the way both the scientific community and the general public approached future anomalies. And the proof is out there captured this shift by examining what lingered after the cameras left and the debates cooled. In academic circles, the mammoth question resurfaced not as a literal inquiry, but as a methodological cautionary tale, prompting renewed discussions about how researchers respond to claims that fall outside established frameworks. Some scientists argued that dismissing such reports too quickly risks alienating the public and reinforcing narratives of elitism, while others warned that engaging too openly could erode the credibility painstakingly built through rigor and restraint. The episode illustrated this divide through interviews filmed months apart, showing how positions hardened or softened over time, shaped by feedback, criticism, and reflection. Meanwhile, advances in environmental DNA sampling emerged as a promising yet controversial tool, capable of detecting trace genetic material in soil and water, raising the tantalizing possibility that even extinct species might leave lingering biological echoes. Although no such testing had yet been conducted in Ohio the mere discussion reignited speculation, demonstrating how technology itself can act as a catalyst for belief, expanding the boundaries of what feels testable. The show framed this development carefully, emphasizing limitations and uncertainties, yet acknowledging how each new tool reshapes imagination alongside capability. Beyond science, the cultural aftershocks continued in quieter ways, influencing art, literature, and local folklore as the mammoth sighting seeped into stories told at community gatherings, evolving with each retelling, less concerned with accuracy than meaning. Residents described how the woods now felt different, not more dangerous, but more alive with possibility, as if attention itself had altered perception. Sociologists suggested that such shifts reflect a human tendency to re-enchant familiar spaces when confronted with mystery, transforming landscapes into narratives rather than coordinates. The Proof is Out There wove these insights into its storytelling, resisting the urge to debunk or endorse, instead documenting transformation. Unexpectedly, a new lead surfaced, not from Ohio but from archival footage unearthed by a private collector, showing a grainy silhouette filmed decades earlier in a different region, dismissed at the time as misidentification. The episode did not claim a connection outright, but juxtaposed the images, inviting viewers to notice similarities and differences, and in doing so, highlighting how patterns emerge when attention aligns. Critics accused the show of retroactive pattern making, while supporters praised its willingness to revisit forgotten data, illustrating once again how interpretation depends as much on context as content. As the narrative unfolded, attention returned to the original witness, now months removed from his experience, reflecting on how the uncertainty had reshaped his sense of reality. He admitted that part of him hoped the mystery would remain unresolved, because closure felt like an ending, whereas ambiguity kept the experience alive, a sentiment echoed by many viewers who wrote in, sharing their own encounters with the unexplained. The episode treated these testimonies not as evidence, but as expressions of a shared psychological landscape where curiosity and fear intermingle. In a compelling segment, historians traced humanity's long relationship with monstrous or impossible sightings, from medieval bestiaries to modern cryptids, arguing that such stories persist because they address emotional truths even when factual ones remain elusive. The mammoth, in this sense, joined a lineage of symbols rather than species. As discussions intensified, ethical questions surfaced about responsibility in storytelling, whether presenting unresolved mysteries risks misleading audiences, or whether denying them undermines intellectual freedom. The host addressed these concerns candidly, acknowledging criticism while defending the program's mission to explore without concluding prematurely. The final moments of the episode returned once more to Ohio by, not with investigative urgency, but with contemplative stillness, showing the forest through changing seasons, snow giving way to mud, then to green, erasing traces while preserving memory. The voiceover reflected on how proof is often imagined as a destination, when in reality it is a process shaped by patience, humility, and openness to revision. The mammoth, whether flesh or fiction, had already altered discourse, leaving behind a subtle but lasting imprint on how mysteries are approached. In this way, the sighting's greatest legacy was not the possibility of survival, but the reminder that certainty is fragile, and that wonder, when handled with care, can coexist with reason without diminishing either. What finally shifted the trajectory of the mammoth narrative was not another sighting, nor a clearer image, but a discovery so subtle that it almost went unnoticed, emerging quietly from a soil sample taken miles away from Ohio by a graduate research team with no interest in cryptids or television intrigue. The Proof is Out There introduced this development with deliberate caution, framing it not as confirmation but as complication, a reminder that nature rarely provides answers in the form we expect. The sample, collected as part of a broader study on post-glacial ecosystems, contained fragments of environmental DNA that defied easy classification, sequences degraded but persistent, echoing genetic markers associated with Pleistocene megafauna. Scientists emphasized immediately that contamination, mislabeling, or statistical anomaly remained far more likely explanations than survival, yet the data passed enough preliminary checks to resist outright dismissal. The episode lingered on this tension, illustrating how science advances not through dramatic revelation, but through uncomfortable questions that refuse to vanish. Interviews with the research team revealed their own ambivalence, excitement tempered by professional anxiety, aware that association with the mammoth narrative could jeopardize credibility if handled carelessly. They described long nights rerunning analyses, hoping for mundane explanations even as the data stubbornly returned the same ambiguous results. The show contextualized this struggle, highlighting how scientific integrity often involves resisting one's own curiosity as much as external pressure. As word of the findings spread, reactions fractured along familiar lines, with enthusiasts seizing on the genetic hint as validation, while skeptics accused the media of inflating noise into narrative. The Proof is Out There resisted both impulses, choosing instead to explore the implications of uncertainty itself, asking what it means when evidence neither confirms nor denies a claim, but hovers in between. The episode drew parallels to past moments in science, where ambiguous data prompted paradigm shifts only after years of debate, reminding viewers that hindsight often simplifies processes that felt chaotic in real time. Meanwhile, the Ohio by region experienced a second wave of attention, quieter but more focused, attracting independent researchers and amateur naturalists armed with sampling kits and a renewed sense of purpose. Local authorities, wary of disruption, imposed restrictions, underscoring how mystery can strain governance even without proof. Residents expressed mixed feelings, some welcoming renewed interest, others longing for anonymity, their environment transformed into a site of projection rather than habitation. The narrative returned repeatedly to this human dimension, emphasizing that the cost of curiosity is rarely abstract. In one poignant segment, the show followed a high school biology teacher who incorporated the mammoth debate into her curriculum, using it to teach students about hypothesis testing, bias, and the provisional nature of knowledge. Her classroom discussions mirrored the broader discourse, students divided yet engaged, demonstrating how unresolved questions can inspire learning rather than confusion. Philosophers interviewed reflected on this pedagogical value, arguing that uncertainty, when framed responsibly, fosters critical thinking more effectively than settled facts. As the episode progressed, attention turned to the ethics of exploration, particularly the risk of confirmation bias in both believers and skeptics. Researchers acknowledged how expectation can shape interpretation, influencing which data are pursued and which are dismissed, a vulnerability that technology alone cannot eliminate. The Mammoth narrative thus became a case study in epistemology, illustrating how knowledge is constructed through negotiation rather than revelation. Late in the episode, a controlled follow-up study was proposed, combining environmental DNA sampling with rigorous controls, designed explicitly to test the Ohio findings. Funding debates ensued, revealing institutional hesitation to invest in research perceived as fringe, despite its methodological soundness. The Proof is Out There presented these deliberations without melodrama, allowing viewers to witness how priorities are set and constrained within scientific systems. As the episode closed, the Mammoth remained elusive, its existence still unproven, yet its impact undeniable. The narrative suggested that the true significance lay not in whether a prehistoric giant still walked the earth, but in how its possibility exposed the delicate balance between openness and skepticism that underpins credible inquiry. The final image returned to the soil sample, magnified and abstract, a visual metaphor for how vast questions can reside within the smallest fragments, waiting not for belief, but for patience. As the proposal for a controlled follow-up study moved slowly through review boards and funding committees, the Mammoth question ceased to be a distant curiosity and instead became a source of real tension within the scientific community, exposing fractures that had long existed beneath the surface but were rarely made visible to the public. The Proof is Out There devoted this chapter of the story to the human cost of ambiguity, focusing on researchers whose careers now intersected with a claim they never intended to touch. Senior academics cautioned younger colleagues against involvement, warning that association with unresolved anomalies could jeopardize grants, tenure prospects, and professional reputation, while others argued that retreating from difficult questions undermines the very spirit of inquiry science claims to uphold. These debates unfolded in conference rooms and private emails, fragments of which were paraphrased on screen, illustrating how institutional dynamics shape what questions are deemed acceptable. One mid-career geneticist, initially supportive of the environmental DNA analysis, withdrew publicly after facing pressure from peers, later admitting in an interview that fear, not evidence, had driven his decision. The episode treated this admission with empathy rather than condemnation, acknowledging how scientific courage is constrained by systems designed to reward certainty. Meanwhile, proponents of the follow-up study refined their methodology obsessively, aware that any flaw would be seized upon as proof of bias. Controls were doubled, sampling locations diversified, and blind analysis protocols implemented, turning the project into a model of rigor precisely because of its controversial context. The show highlighted this irony, noting how fringe-adjacent questions often receive stricter scrutiny than mainstream ones, not always to their detriment. As preparations continued, media interest reignited, less sensational than before but sharper, framing the story as a referendum on scientific openness rather than Mammoth survival. Commentators debated whether the community was witnessing healthy skepticism or institutional gatekeeping, and The Proof is Out There resisted framing the conflict as a binary, instead tracing how both impulses coexist within the same individuals. The original Ohio witness watched these developments from a distance, expressing a sense of detachment, as if the story had outgrown him, his brief encounter now a catalyst for processes far beyond his control. He described feeling both validated and irrelevant, a paradox the episode used to explore how personal experience is often subsumed by abstraction once it enters public discourse. Fieldwork resumed quietly under the new study, teams collecting samples with meticulous documentation, their movements deliberate and unspectacular, a sharp contrast to the drama surrounding the project. The forest offered no revelations, only silence, reinforcing the notion that absence is not empty but resistant. Back in laboratories, analysis began under strict anonymity, data sets labeled without context to minimize expectation, an attempt to let patterns emerge uncolored by narrative. As preliminary results trickled in, they mirrored earlier ambiguity, neither confirming nor refuting the presence of anomalous genetic material, a repetition that frustrated some and emboldened others. The episode lingered on these reactions, showing how identical information can inspire opposite interpretations depending on prior belief. Philosophers of science returned to contextualize this phenomenon, explaining how uncertainty tests intellectual humility, revealing whether commitment lies with truth-seeking or with outcome defense. The narrative broadened further, examining historical cases where controversial data divided communities, some resolved through eventual consensus, others fading into obscurity without closure. These parallels served not as prediction but as perspective, reminding viewers that not all questions are destined for resolution within a single generation. As tensions peaked, a public forum was convened, bringing together supporters and critics of the study in a moderated discussion broadcast in excerpts. The exchange was civil but charged, participants speaking past one another at times, united only by a shared desire to protect the integrity of science as they understood it. The Proof is Out There framed this moment as a microcosm of broader societal debates, where disagreement persists not from lack of information, but from differing values. In the closing sequence, the episode returned to the mammoth imagery once more, now less literal and more symbolic, an emblem of unresolved inquiry standing at the edge of knowledge. The voiceover reflected on how some questions exert pressure precisely because they remain unanswered, forcing systems and individuals alike to reveal their priorities. Whether the mammoth ever walked again mattered less, the episode suggested, than how the pursuit of that possibility reshaped the people and institutions drawn into its orbit, leaving behind a legacy of introspection that would endure regardless of outcome. When the interim results of the controlled study were finally released, they arrived not as a declaration, but as a document dense with qualifiers, caveats, and statistical nuance, and yet their impact was immediate and explosive, reshaping public perception in ways no single image ever had. The Proof is Out There devoted the episode to unpacking how partial findings can wield disproportionate influence, especially when they touch a nerve already exposed by months of anticipation. The report stated that anomalous genetic fragments, while present in several samples, could not be confidently attributed to contamination or known modern species, yet also fell short of matching any complete Pleistocene genome with certainty. This liminal conclusion ignited division, with some headlines framing it as near confirmation, others as decisive debunking, illustrating how narrative framing can eclipse content. Scientists interviewed expressed frustration at seeing careful language reduced to absolutes, their attempts at precision flattened by the demand for clarity. The episode slowed the conversation, inviting viewers into the mechanics of interpretation, showing how confidence intervals and probability thresholds function not as hedges, but as honest acknowledgments of complexity. Within the scientific community, reactions hardened into factions, not neatly aligned with belief or skepticism, but with differing philosophies about evidence thresholds. Some argued that the persistence of unexplained data warranted expanded investigation, while others insisted that without positive identification, resources should be redirected to more tractable questions. These disagreements spilled into public view through op-eds and conference debates, a transparency both lauded and lamented. The show captured moments of genuine introspection, researchers admitting uncertainty not as weakness, but as professional integrity, even as critics accused them of indecision. Meanwhile, the Ohio by region experienced an unexpected transformation, becoming a symbolic landscape rather than a physical one, invoked in arguments far removed from its quiet roads and forests. Residents watched as their home was debated on screens worldwide, feeling both invisible and exposed, their daily lives unchanged yet reframed by distant discourse. The original witness was invited to respond to the findings, his reaction subdued, acknowledging that the data neither confirmed nor negated his experience, leaving him in a familiar but isolating space between camps. The episode treated his response with restraint, emphasizing how personal truth can coexist with scientific uncertainty without resolving either. As media cycles intensified, misinformation proliferated alongside legitimate analysis, prompting the show to address its own role in shaping attention. The host acknowledged the fine line between exploration and amplification, reiterating the program's commitment to context over conclusion. Educational segments broke down how genetic fragments can persist in environments long after organisms vanish, complicating assumptions about presence and absence, yet these explanations struggled to compete with more sensational interpretations. Philosophers and ethicists returned to frame the moment as a stress test for public understanding of science, questioning whether society is equipped to engage with probabilistic knowledge in an age that rewards certainty. The episode highlighted initiatives aimed at improving scientific literacy, using the Mammoth debate as a teaching tool rather than a verdict. As tensions peaked, a prominent journal published a commentary urging caution, emphasizing that unresolved data should prompt refinement, not rhetoric, a sentiment echoed by some and dismissed by others as gatekeeping. The Proof is Out There contextualized this backlash, tracing historical patterns where preliminary findings were overinterpreted, sometimes leading to retractions, sometimes to breakthroughs, underscoring that uncertainty is a phase, not a failure. In its closing moments, the episode returned to the forest once more, now stripped of symbolism, presented simply as an ecosystem layered with time, holding traces of countless lives past and present. The voiceover reflected on how the interim results did not answer the Mammoth question, but transformed it, shifting focus from existence to process, from spectacle to scrutiny. The Mammoth, increasingly abstract, functioned as a catalyst for examining how knowledge advances amid pressure, reminding viewers that truth rarely arrives whole, instead emerging incrementally through patience, debate, and the willingness to dwell in ambiguity. The episode ended not with resolution, but with a recalibration, inviting audiences to consider whether the discomfort of not knowing might be an essential component of genuine understanding. The ripple effects of the interim findings extended far beyond laboratories and television studios, seeping into social and political spheres where nuance is often sacrificed for momentum, and The Proof is Out There turned its focus toward these broader consequences, documenting how a question about a prehistoric animal became a proxy for debates about trust, authority, and public engagement with science. Policymakers, previously indifferent to the Ohio by investigation, now found themselves fielding inquiries from constituents demanding either increased funding for anomalous research or stricter oversight to prevent what they perceived as wasteful speculation. The episode traced how these pressures manifested in committee hearings, where scientific advisors struggled to communicate probabilistic conclusions within frameworks that favored decisive answers. Lawmakers, accustomed to binary outcomes, expressed frustration with ambiguity, inadvertently revealing a disconnect between political processes and scientific reality. Advocacy groups emerged on both sides, some championing exploratory research as essential to innovation, others warning that legitimizing fringe inquiries could erode public confidence in established science. The show presented these groups not as caricatures, but as expressions of genuine concern, illustrating how values shape interpretation as much as facts. In Ohio by itself, the impact was subtle but profound, as residents noticed increased surveillance, signage, and regulatory attention in areas once ignored, transforming familiar spaces into contested zones. Farmers reported restrictions on land access for sampling, sparking resentment toward a phenomenon they never asked to host, while local businesses experienced modest upticks in curiosity-driven tourism, a paradoxical blend of inconvenience and opportunity. Sociologists interviewed contextualized these changes within a pattern seen whenever mystery intersects with governance, where uncertainty prompts control mechanisms even in the absence of clear threat. Meanwhile, educational institutions began incorporating the Mammoth case into curricula beyond biology, using it to explore media literacy, ethics, and the sociology of knowledge, a multidisciplinary expansion the show highlighted as an unintended but constructive outcome. Students debated not whether mammoths existed, but how claims are evaluated, who gets to decide credibility, and how power influences discourse, reflecting a shift from content to process. The Proof is Out There examined how social media platforms amplified extremes, rewarding confident assertions over cautious analysis, accelerating polarization while compressing timelines of judgment. Algorithms favored engagement, not accuracy, creating feedback loops where partial information hardened into belief. The episode did not absolve traditional media, acknowledging how even careful reporting can contribute to distortion when stripped of context. Interviews with journalists revealed internal struggles to balance responsibility with relevance, a tension mirrored in the scientific community's own debates. As the Mammoth narrative evolved into a symbol, it attracted ideological overlays unrelated to paleontology, invoked in arguments about institutional transparency, rural representation, and the legitimacy of expertise. The show traced how these associations emerged organically, not through conspiracy, but through resonance, the mammoth's ambiguity providing a canvas for disparate anxieties. At the same time, international interest grew, with researchers from other countries drawing parallels to local anomalies, prompting discussions about global standards for investigating unexplained phenomena. These exchanges underscored both the universality of curiosity and the variability of institutional tolerance for uncertainty. Ethical considerations resurfaced, particularly regarding consent and impact on local communities, as scholars questioned whether curiosity alone justified disruption. The episode treated these concerns seriously, featuring residents who articulated fatigue and skepticism, reminding viewers that mysteries are lived experiences for some, not abstractions. As pressure mounted, a government advisory panel released a statement affirming the value of exploratory research while cautioning against premature conclusions, a carefully balanced response that satisfied few but reflected institutional compromise. The Proof is Out There framed this moment as emblematic of the broader challenge, governing in the absence of certainty, where decisions must be made despite incomplete knowledge. In its closing sequence, the episode returned not to data or debate, but to silence, showing Ohio by at dawn, unremarkable and enduring, indifferent to the narratives projected onto it. The voiceover reflected on how the mammoth question had become less about an animal and more about collective negotiation with uncertainty, exposing strengths and vulnerabilities in how societies process the unknown. The episode suggested that while proof remains elusive, the conversations sparked by its pursuit have tangible consequences, shaping policy, education, and trust in ways that will outlast any eventual resolution, reminding viewers that the search for understanding is as much a social endeavor as a scientific one. The unexpected turning point did not arrive through new technology or fresh fieldwork, but through the quiet resurfacing of data long considered irrelevant, buried not beneath ice or soil, but within archives few had reason to revisit. And The Proof is Out There framed this revelation as a reminder that progress sometimes moves backward before it advances. A retired archivist, responding to renewed interest in anomalous sightings, revisited a regional wildlife survey conducted decades earlier, its yellowed pages documenting species distribution with meticulous care, yet lacking the interpretive frameworks of modern genetics. Within those records, a series of unexplained entries stood out, measurements of tracks and environmental disturbances categorized at the time as errors or misprints, dismissed because they did not fit known parameters. The episode traced how these anomalies had been systematically excluded from final reports, not through malice, but through a prevailing assumption that outliers represented noise rather than signal. When cross-referenced with contemporary geographic data, the locations of these entries aligned uncannily with areas implicated in the Ohio by discussion, a coincidence too precise to ignore yet too incomplete to confirm anything definitively. The Proof is Out There resisted sensational framing, instead reconstructing how institutional habits shape memory, privileging coherence over curiosity. Experts were brought in to reassess the archival material, their reactions cautious but intrigued, acknowledging that while the data lacked context, its persistence across time warranted attention. This development unsettled both advocates and skeptics, undermining claims that the mammoth narrative emerged solely from modern media dynamics, while also failing to provide the concrete evidence believers sought. The episode explored this discomfort, showing how deeply invested each side had become in particular interpretations, and how disruptive it can be when new information refuses to align with established positions. Historians of science contextualized the moment, noting that many significant discoveries began as anomalies relegated to footnotes, ignored until frameworks evolved to accommodate them. Yet they also warned against romanticizing archival surprises, emphasizing that most outliers remain outliers for good reason. The narrative balanced these perspectives, neither elevating the old data to proof nor dismissing it as irrelevant, instead highlighting how knowledge is cumulative and selective. As word of the archival findings spread, debates reignited with renewed complexity, forcing participants to grapple with the possibility that uncertainty was not a recent development, but a long-standing feature of the case. Media outlets struggled to frame the story, uncertain whether revisiting old records constituted advancement or regression, and The Proof is Out There used this hesitation to examine how novelty is often mistaken for significance. Interviews with archivists underscored the labor of preservation, the countless details maintained without expectation of future relevance, reminding viewers that archives are not static repositories but latent resources awaiting reinterpretation. Meanwhile, scientists involved in the controlled study revisited their assumptions, acknowledging that historical context might inform present analysis, not by validating extraordinary claims, but by revealing patterns of oversight. This reflexive turn marked a subtle shift in tone, less adversarial and more introspective, as participants recognized the limits of their own perspectives. The original witness, learning of the archival data, expressed a quiet vindication, not in the sense of being proven right, but in knowing that his experience resonated with a deeper historical ambiguity. The episode treated his reaction with nuance, illustrating how personal narratives intersect with institutional ones without resolving them. As discussions evolved, the Mammoth receded further into abstraction, its potential existence overshadowed by questions about how societies record, remember, and reinterpret information. The Proof Is Out There drew parallels to other cases where archival reevaluation reshaped understanding, emphasizing that such moments rarely deliver closure, instead complicating narratives previously thought settled. Critics accused the program of prolonging uncertainty for dramatic effect, while supporters argued that confronting complexity is itself a form of honesty. The host addressed this critique directly, reflecting on the ethical tension between storytelling and stewardship, acknowledging that while mystery attracts attention, responsibility lies in how it is framed. In its closing sequence, the episode juxtaposed archival images with present-day landscapes, the same terrain observed through different lenses across time, underscoring continuity amid change. The voiceover reflected on how data, like fossils, gains meaning through context, and how revisiting the past can destabilize assumptions about the present. The Mammoth, now more symbol than subject, embodied the challenge of integrating incomplete information into coherent understanding, reminding viewers that certainty is often provisional, contingent on what has been preserved and what has been overlooked. As the episode concluded, it became clear that the archival revelation did not settle the debate, but transformed it, shifting focus from proving existence to examining process, from asking whether the Mammoth survived to asking how knowledge survives, evolves, and sometimes returns unexpectedly to challenge what we thought we knew. As the archival anomalies collided with the modern genetic ambiguities, the Mammoth question entered its most volatile phase, no longer sustained by novelty, but by accumulation, each fragment of data pressing against the others until the collective weight demanded a reckoning. And The Proof Is Out There framed this convergence as the moment when inquiry either matures into discipline or collapses under its own contradictions. The controlled study team reconvened with archivists, historians, and statisticians in a rare interdisciplinary forum, acknowledging that no single lens could adequately process the emerging complexity. This gathering, tense yet deliberate, became a focal point of the episode, illustrating how collaboration often begins only after isolation fails. The archival records, once dismissed as clerical errors, were digitized and overlaid with contemporary environmental data, revealing not a pattern of certainty, but a pattern of recurrence, sporadic anomalies appearing across decades in ecologically similar zones. Scientists cautioned against mistaking correlation for causation, yet conceded that recurrence itself warranted explanation, even if that explanation remained mundane. The episode lingered on this admission, subtle but significant, marking a shift from dismissal to engagement. Meanwhile, the environmental DNA samples underwent a final round of blind reanalysis, incorporating insights from the archival work to refine contamination models. Results emerged slowly, their ambiguity persistent but altered, narrowing the range of plausible explanations without collapsing it. This narrowing, the show emphasized, was progress, even if it disappointed those hoping for decisive revelation. Public reaction, however, grew increasingly polarized, patience thinning as the story approached what many assumed would be an inevitable conclusion. Commentators demanded closure, accusing institutions of obfuscation, while others urged restraint, arguing that forcing resolution risks distortion. The Proof Is Out There used this tension to explore a deeper question about narrative expectation, how audiences conditioned by definitive endings struggle with processes that resist them. Within Ohio By, the community faced a choice prompted by renewed attention, whether to formally restrict further investigation to reclaim normalcy or to permit continued study in hopes of eventual clarity. Town hall meetings captured this dilemma vividly, residents voicing fatigue alongside curiosity, weighing disruption against participation in something larger than themselves. The episode treated these deliberations with respect, portraying governance as negotiation rather than decree. At the national level, funding agencies reached a crossroads, pressured by public interest yet bound by precedent, ultimately approving a limited extension of the study with explicit boundaries, a compromise reflecting institutional caution. This decision, though modest, carried symbolic weight, signaling that uncertainty had not disqualified the question, but neither had it elevated it beyond scrutiny. The original witness returned briefly to the narrative, now reflective rather than defensive, acknowledging that whatever he saw had sparked a journey far beyond personal validation. His perspective anchored the episode emotionally, reminding viewers that behind abstractions lie lived moments that cannot be peer-reviewed. As analysis intensified, philosophical voices grew more prominent, framing the Mammoth debate as an illustration of epistemic humility, the recognition that knowledge advances through constraint as much as curiosity. They argued that the true test of inquiry lies not in proving extraordinary claims, but in managing uncertainty without surrendering rigor. The episode contrasted this view with more cynical interpretations, suggesting that prolonged ambiguity serves institutional self-preservation, yet resisted endorsing either stance fully. Instead, it documented the friction between ideals and realities, where transparency competes with reputational risk. In its latter half, the narrative shifted tone, quieter and more introspective, acknowledging that the convergence of data had not produced a climax in the traditional sense, but a threshold, a point beyond which the question itself must change. The Mammoth, once imagined as a creature awaiting rediscovery, now functioned as a boundary object, connecting disciplines, communities, and debates without belonging fully to any. The Proof is Out There closed the episode by revisiting the original footage once more, not to extract new meaning, but to contextualize its role as catalyst rather than conclusion. The voiceover reflected on how the pursuit of proof had revealed the contours of modern inquiry, its strengths and vulnerabilities, and how the desire for certainty can both motivate and mislead. As the screen faded, viewers were left not with an answer, but with a choice, whether to accept the unresolved as failure or to recognize it as an honest reflection of how knowledge unfolds, incrementally, imperfectly, and often without the comfort of closure. As the investigation approached its penultimate stage, a subtle but decisive shift occurred, not in the data itself, but in how all involved began to speak about it, as if an unspoken consensus had formed that the pursuit of certainty had reached its natural boundary, and that whatever lay beyond would require a different kind of reckoning. The Proof is Out There framed this phase not as an ending, but as an inflection point, where effort gives way to reflection and the limits of method become impossible to ignore. Scientists who had once argued fiercely over interpretation now spoke more cautiously, acknowledging that despite years of scrutiny, sampling, and cross-disciplinary collaboration, the evidence refused to resolve into a definitive narrative. Environmental DNA continued to suggest anomalies without identity, archival records hinted at recurrence without explanation, and eyewitness testimony remained compelling without corroboration. Rather than portraying this convergence as failure, the episode emphasized how such outcomes expose the contours of knowledge itself, revealing where tools end and judgment begins. Funding agencies, facing mounting pressure to justify continued investment, convened final reviews, their deliberations marked by an unusual transparency born of fatigue as much as principle. In these sessions, the Mammoth question was no longer debated on its own terms, but as part of a broader conversation about how institutions decide when to stop asking, a decision rarely acknowledged yet constantly enacted. The Ohio by community, informed of the likely conclusion of formal investigation, responded with mixed emotion, some expressing relief at the prospect of restored anonymity, others mourning the loss of purpose that had briefly connected their quiet region to a global discourse. Town representatives spoke candidly about the cost of attention, recognizing that mystery can invigorate identity but also distort it. The episode lingered on these voices, grounding abstract debates in lived experience. Meanwhile, the original witness reflected publicly for the first time on the possibility that proof might never arrive, admitting that while part of him still hoped for validation, another part had come to accept uncertainty as an enduring companion rather than an enemy. His words resonated widely, quoted across platforms as a rare articulation of reconciliation between conviction and doubt. Philosophers of science use this moment to articulate a central theme of the series, that proof is not a singular object, but a relationship between evidence, interpretation, and trust, one that shifts with context and expectation. They argued that the Mammoth debate revealed how modern societies struggle not with ignorance, but with the discomfort of provisional knowledge, preferring decisive answers even when reality offers only gradients. The Proof is Out There underscored this tension by revisiting earlier moments in the investigation, contrasting initial urgency with present restraint, showing how the same questions can feel different when time alters perspective. Media coverage reflected this evolution unevenly, some outlets embracing the nuanced conclusion, others framing the absence of proof as anticlimax or evasion. The host addressed this divergence directly, acknowledging the temptation to equate mystery with manipulation, while defending the value of honest uncertainty. In laboratories, the final samples were cataloged and archived, not discarded, a symbolic gesture signaling that unanswered questions need not be erased to move forward. Researchers spoke of the case as one they would reference in teaching and mentorship, not for its outcome, but for its process, a lesson in humility and rigor. As the episode progressed, attention shifted from the mammoth itself to the concept of extinction, exploring how scientific definitions intersect with emotional narratives, and how the idea of finality provokes resistance. The mammoth, once a candidate for rediscovery, now served as a lens through which to examine humanity's relationship with loss and continuity. In its closing movement, the episode returned to Ohio by one final time before the conclusion, showing the landscape unchanged yet reinterpreted, the woods no longer charged with expectation but imbued with memory. The voiceover reflected on how the search for proof had altered not the forest, but those who looked at it, expanding awareness of how much remains beyond immediate comprehension. As the screen dimmed, the narrative acknowledged that the final chapter would not deliver confirmation or denial, but something arguably more difficult, an acceptance of limits that challenges the very premise of proof, setting the stage for a conclusion that asks not what we have found, but what we have learned by searching. The final chapter did not arrive with revelation or denial, but with a quiet recalibration, a deliberate slowing that allowed the weight of the journey itself to settle. And The Proof is Out There embraced this restraint as the most honest conclusion it could offer. In the absence of definitive proof, the series turned inward, asking what had truly been uncovered through years of pursuit, debate, and disciplined doubt. The mammoth, once framed as a question of survival, now stood as a testament to the endurance of inquiry, its presence sustained not by flesh and bone, but by the human impulse to test the boundaries of certainty. Scientists involved in the investigation gathered for a final roundtable, not to announce findings but to reflect on process, acknowledging that while the data never converged into a singular answer, it had refined methods, exposed assumptions, and strengthened collaboration across disciplines that rarely intersect. They spoke candidly about disappointment tempered by respect, about learning to sit with ambiguity without surrendering rigor, and about how the case would inform future decisions about when to pursue anomalies and when to let them rest. The Proof is Out There framed these reflections not as retreat, but as maturation, a recognition that science advances as much through knowing when to pause as when to press forward. The Ohio by community, now largely returned to obscurity, marked the closing of the investigation with subdued relief, the forests once again places of routine rather than projection. Residents described how the heightened attention had altered their relationship with the land, making them more attentive, more curious, even as they welcomed the return of normalcy. The series treated these voices as essential, reminding viewers that mysteries unfold in real places inhabited by real people, whose lives absorb the consequences of curiosity long after cameras depart. The original witness, whose fleeting encounter had set everything in motion, offered his final thoughts, neither triumphant nor regretful, expressing a quiet gratitude for having contributed to a conversation larger than himself. He acknowledged that whatever crossed his path that winter night might never be named, yet its impact endured in the questions it inspired, a form of meaning independent of verification. Philosophers returned one last time to articulate the deeper implications, suggesting that the Mammoth narrative revealed a cultural tension between the desire for closure and the reality of provisional knowledge. They argued that proof, often imagined as an endpoint, is better understood as a threshold, a point at which evidence, interpretation, and trust align sufficiently to act. even if doubt remains. The series echoed this view, reframing proof not as certainty, but as confidence earned through transparency and humility. Media analysts reflected on the role of storytelling in shaping expectations, acknowledging how narratives conditioned by definitive endings struggle to accommodate open conclusions, and how responsible exploration requires resisting the urge to resolve prematurely. The host addressed the audience directly, acknowledging the frustration inherent in unresolved stories, while inviting viewers to consider whether the discomfort of not knowing might itself be instructive. As the episode unfolded, archival footage from across the series played softly, not to summarize but to evoke continuity: the forest, the labs, the meetings, the faces that had animated the pursuit. These images underscored how the Mammoth had functioned as a connective thread, linking disparate domains through shared uncertainty. The proof is out there emphasized that while the Mammoth's physical existence remained unproven, its conceptual existence had already altered how questions are asked and answered, encouraging a more nuanced engagement with the unknown. In the closing moments, the series returned to the original Ohio footage one final time, presented without commentary, allowing the image to stand as it had at the beginning, ambiguous and unresolved. The voiceover reflected on how the search for proof had revealed not a hidden creature, but a portrait of modern inquiry, its aspirations and limits, its capacity for wonder tempered by discipline. The Mammoth faded once more into abstraction, leaving behind a legacy not of discovery but of dialogue, reminding viewers that some questions matter not because they are answered, but because they challenge us to examine how we know what we know. As the screen went dark, the conclusion offered no verdict, only an invitation to carry forward a more patient, reflective curiosity, one that honors evidence without demanding finality, recognizing that the proof we seek is often less about what lies out there and more about how we choose to look.